So let's get started. Good evening and welcome to our discussion this evening, Perspectives from Northeast Oregon on Salmon Recovery and Restoring the Lower Snake River. I'll just start by saying my fingers are crossed. It's really blowing outside my house right now, and I'm hoping the power lines don't go out and everything go blank. So fingers are crossed. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening for a really very special discussion with three accomplished guests and Northeast Oregonians, Adam Capetillo, Christina Devilier of the Greater Hells Canyon Council, and then Andrea Malmberg. Before kicking off our discussion, I want to start with a few comments and then introduce our speakers. My name is Joseph Bogaard. I'm the Executive Director of the Save Our Wild Salmon Coalition. SOS is 30 years old this year. We're a coalition of organizations, commercial and sport conservation organizations, commercial and sport fishing associations, orca and clean energy advocates working together to protect and restore abundant fishable populations of salmon and steelhead in the Columbia and Snake Rivers for the benefit of people, fish and wildlife, and ecosystems. The Columbia Basin was once the most productive salmon landscape on the planet, and our education, organizing, outreach, and policy work focuses mainly on protecting, restoring, and reconnecting the freshwater habitats these fish need to survive and restore themselves. Since the 1990s, we've pursued two main goals. First, to secure immediate operational changes at the dams and reservoirs, mainly to date increased spill over the dams to improve survival for fish as they migrate to and from the ocean. Second, beginning in 1998, to restore the Lower Snake River, the Columbia River's largest and historically most salmon productive tributary. This is our second webinar of our three-part series this fall. You can learn more about the other two webinars on our website. Our first webinar 2 weeks ago featured three Columbia Snake River salmon advocates / veterans reflecting on their work over many years to protect and restore salmon and steelhead in the Columbia and Snake Rivers. This is our second webinar, of course, and then our third webinar is in 2 weeks on November 18th, and we'll hear stories from three renowned salmon scientists with many decades of experience in the trenches of salmon recovery work, research, policy, and politics. So hope you'll join that. We're recording these webinars and we'll make them available online in the weeks ahead. I want to share a few logistics for this evening. We've blocked out a couple of hours, the panelists and I, for this evening. We're aiming for about 90 minutes, a mix of conversation led by our panelists and then followed by question and answer with all of you. And we can spill past the 90 minutes if needed. The chat box is available for your use this evening, and questions can be also submitted through the Q&A box that you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. I want to thank my colleagues, Carrie Herman, Martha Campos, and Sam Mace for their help and support to organize this webinar this evening and support the series. If technical problems do arise, hopefully they won't, you can email Carrie this evening in real time and she'll do her best to help. She can be reached at Carrie, C-A-R-R-I-E, @wildsalmon.org. So now turning to this evening's discussion, I want to welcome Adam and Christina and Andrea. And thank you all for sharing your time with us. I'm really excited about this conversation. I have spent a little bit of time, too little time, in Northeast Oregon. It's a really beautiful landscape and has great communities and people and history. And as a salmon advocate, pertinent to this conversation, I feel that Northeast Oregon hasn't really gotten the attention that it deserves compared to, for example, central Idaho, with regards to its salmon history, the community-driven salmon recovery activities and investments, and its great potential for significant restoration when the Lower Snake River dams are removed. It seems to me, at least from the outside, I live in Washington, that there's been a lot of activity to protect and restore and reconnect salmon habitat in Northeast Oregon. I think we'll hear about a bunch of that this evening, that there's a lot of support for that locally, but that the results, the response by the fish has been less than what it sort of could be or should be, due in large part to downstream impacts. By removing the 4 lower Snake River dams and restoring that stretch of river, Northeast Oregon could realize much greater potential for recovery of salmon and steelhead and the many benefits they bring with them, ecological, cultural, economic, and otherwise. And then a last thing before we hear from our panelists, I just want to set briefly a little bit of context and say a couple things about recent and I think significant developments connected to Columbian Snake River salmon recovery efforts. Without going into great detail now, and I imagine many of you have been tracking the news, a joint request was recently made by the parties to the litigation, the Nez Perce Tribe, the state of Oregon, conservation and fishing plaintiffs, and the Biden administration for a pause in the long-running litigation over salmon and dams in the Columbia Basin to allow the parties the opportunity and time to work together over the next 8 months. That's their time frame, in an effort to develop and begin to implement a comprehensive plan that protects and restores Columbia Snake River salmon and steelhead and complies with the law. This request came with an interim agreement, 1 year, for dam operations on the lower Columbia and lower Snake Rivers in 2022. Not as much as they need, insufficient to protect and restore them over time, but a little bit better than what's occurred recently in terms of dam operations. These developments are a big deal and an essential step if we, the people of the Northwest and others, are going to develop and deliver a regional solution that protects and restores these fish. Leadership in DC is engaged. Leadership in the Northwest is also engaged, including, of course, Congressman Simpson from Idaho, Congressman Blumenauer and Governor Brown in Oregon. And then more recently, in late October, Senator Murray and Governor Inslee jointly announced their next steps following on their earlier commitment to work expeditiously with the people of the region to develop and deliver a long-term solution for Snake River salmon in Northwest communities. These developments are significant, and they come as the result of a lot of hard work by a lot of people over many years. And I'm sure many of you on the call tonight have been part of that. And I'll sort of emphasize and add the visionary and relentless and won't take no for an answer leadership of the Nez Perce Tribe especially, but many other Northwest tribes too. And I'll leave it at that for now. We can talk more about it later. So let's jump in. We'll hear first from Christina Devilier of the Greater Hells Canyon Council, and then followed by Adam Capetillo, Nez Perce tribal member, and Andrea Malmberg, a rancher with her husband, Tony, in Northeast Oregon. Christina, you can start, and I think you're going to want to screen share, and hopefully we won't have any technical difficulties as we move forward from here. Welcome, Christina.
Hey there. Can you guys see my screen?
We can.
Okay.
It could be expanded. I'm not sure how to do that.
Is it better now?
Yes, looks great.
All right. Cool. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Good to see the turnout, and yeah, hope we tell you some things you didn't already know. So welcome and thanks. And thanks so much to Joseph and Save Our Wild Salmon for hosting this conversation. So I'm Christina Devilier. I grew up in Northeast Oregon, in the Grand, and now I live and work in the very, very northeast corner of Oregon, in the Wallowa Valley, in the heart of Nez Perce country. And Nez Perce country is the heart of the Columbia Basin in a lot of ways. I'm the connections coordinator for Greater Hells Canyon Council, an Eastern Oregon nonprofit that got its start helping to defeat a dam that, if built, would have flooded the last free-flowing stretch of the Middle Snake here in Hells Canyon on the Oregon-Idaho border. More than 50 years later, we're still pushing for a freer snake, as well as collaborating and advocating for the integrity of our spectacular home. Our mission is to connect, protect, and restore the wildlands, waters, native species, and habitats of the Greater Hells Canyon region, ensuring a legacy of healthy ecosystems for future generations. As connections coordinator, I work with many partners to enhance ecological connectivity in our mission area. Ecological connectivity is the degree to which animals can move freely through the landscape. Well-connected landscapes are increasingly important as climate change alters suitable habitat. Half of species on Earth, that's plants and animals, are already on the move at their appropriate pace due to climate change. Climate migration models like this one by the Nature Conservancy show many pathways converging in the Greater Hells Canyon region as animals, in this case, move northward and elevationally upward, tracking their suitable niches. Working on connectivity is what led me to the effort to free the snake. Connectivity is essentially a matter of corridors versus barriers. And for aquatic species, there's no more obvious barrier than a dam. A dam is a wall in their river. In Northeast Oregon, more than 1,000 miles of rivers and creeks are impacted by 4 specific walls in the Lower Snake: Ice Harbor, Little Goose, Lower Monumental, and Lower Granite dams. It's really important to keep in mind that it's not just fish who need healthy river systems. Terrestrial connectivity can be understood in terms of watersheds too. In Northeast Oregon, in these spectacular mountains and canyons, you can follow water 8,000 feet down from the peaks of the Wallowas to the depths of Hell's Canyon over just a few dozen miles. In a steep landscape like this, perennial waterways, streams, and rivers, the canyons they've carved, and their rich riparian zones are the most important connectivity corridors for nearly all wildlife. This is true throughout the interior West, and the steeper or drier the landscape, the truer it is. This means that the quality of riparian systems is all important for a huge number of species, both as they are living and moving now, and as they migrate to adapt to climate change. Some species, you could call them keystone species for connectivity, have outsized impacts on the quality of riparian systems. Beavers are one. Another one, salmon. Salmon are one of just a handful of organisms that move calories and nutrients and minerals from the ocean back to headwaters. Gravity and erosion mean that most of the time resources slip away downstream. But every year, salmon and steelhead runs bring great pulses of nutrients from the ocean back hundreds of miles into the interior waterways where these fish spawn and die, benefiting ecosystems and communities all along the way. Along some Pacific Northwest waterways, half of the nitrogen, which is to say half of the fertilizer in riparian vegetation, came from the ocean via salmon. Salmon need robust connectivity in the whole river network through which they travel. And they also contribute mightily to the quality of those connections. So the health of salmon runs is one important indicator of the quality of bioregional connections. Unfortunately, on that metric, as you all know, our region is struggling. Columbia River system, as Joseph said, was once maybe the most and certainly one of the most productive salmon fisheries in the world. The Snake is its greatest tributary, estimated that 40% of total runs out of the Columbia came out of the Snake, gateway to thousands of miles of gorgeous cold water spawning streams in Northeast Oregon and Idaho. Rivers like the Lostine, my home river, the Imnaha, Joseph Creek, the Grand Ronde, aptly named Salmon River in Idaho, of course. In the last century, humans transformed our region's greatest living system into a machine. To get back and forth between the ocean and the headwaters where they spawn, Snake River, salmon, and steelhead must cross 8 dams at each end of their life cycle, 4 on the Columbia, 4 on the Snake. Each blockage, the dam and the hot slackwater reservoir behind it, whittles away at the runs. At least 4 million wild salmon and steelhead used to spawn annually in the Snake River Basin. Now, fewer than 60,000 wild fish return to the whole Snake River Basin, and we're about 20% of that here in Northeast Oregon. Every Snake River salmon and steelhead population is on the endangered species list. So what did those 4 million fish mean for Northeast Oregon? Healthy river systems chock full of thriving plants and wildlife. For one thing, economists estimate that if runs were restored, the fertility benefits alone in riparian corridors would be worth 12 million a year in the Snake River Basin. Nimipu people used to eat salmon every day, upwards of 300 pounds per person per year. Early trappers traveling my home rivers complained about spawning salmon swamping their canoes. Enough sockeye returned every year to Wallowa Lake to support 2 canneries for a while. Caption on this photo reads, "In the fall of 1880, we seined at the mouth of the river at the head of the lake. One end of the seine was fastened to a tree and the other was hauled around the school of fish with a rowboat. Required a team and 8 men to drag in the haul, which usually contained 1,500 fish at an average weight of 5 pounds apiece." Despite catastrophic declines of the runs, communities in Northeast Oregon still rely on Snake River fish. In rural Northeast Oregon, where only a few thousand people live, scores of good career jobs in fisheries and restoration depend on salmon. Guiding, outfitting, and riverside hospitality account for hundreds more jobs. Nez Perce, Umatilla, and Wallowa people still fish Northeast Oregon waters and have been leaders in fish recovery in the region for decades. In some cases, the definitive leaders. Fishermen chasing salmon and steelhead spend $12 million every year in the 3 Northeast Oregon counties. Many farmers and ranchers have restored waterways on their properties to benefit fish, but have seen little return on that big investment of time and care and land. Bonneville Power Administration has spent $250 million a year over the last 30 years, mitigating for effects of the dams, including funding many restoration projects like this one on the upper Grand Ronde. And the sad thing is that all of these restored streams are just vacant housing if fish populations continue to crash. On the other hand, you can probably imagine what a boost restored runs would be for Northeast Oregon's headwaters economies. But a fair number of scientists are saying we're looking at 20 years before Snake River runs are extinct. The status quo is not working, not for salmon, and not for the communities and ecosystems that depend on them. All big dams are harmful to fish, but these 4 dams are also at the end of their useful lives. They're pushing their expected lifespan of 50 years. They provide together only about 4% of the region's power. They're in need of extensive, expensive repairs. The slack water in their reservoirs is only getting hotter as the climate crisis intensifies, sometimes hot enough to outright kill adult fish. Even the federal agencies that operate the lower 4 Snake River dams have acknowledged that breaching them is the single best thing we could do to give communities upstream a shot at a future with salmon. But the inertia at these agencies is entrenched and depressing. In Northeast Oregon and across the Northwest, though, the public, NGOs, tribes, all the tribes, and pretty much, infrastructure and policy and energy people and ecologists and landowners and business leaders are calling for collaborative legislative solution on the snake. A solution that will breach the dams, replace their services, restore the river, and create a better future for all the communities in the watershed. We're starting to see good movement on that across the board. Joseph talked a bit about this. Representative Simpson's announcement definitely got the ball rolling in a major way, and it's really encouraging to see Washington, Senator Murray and Governor Inslee's announcement of this joint state and federal process that puts dam removal firmly on the table. It's time for that, past time. I hope Oregon's congressional delegation will be contributing their leadership soon to this process and advocating for Northeast Oregon's interests in a reasonable package. Again, we got 20% of the rivers that are impacted by these dams. So some communities count on services the lower Snake River dams provide, including barging and irrigation. There are wheat farmers here in Northeast Oregon who truck their harvest to Lewiston to barge on the Snake. We need investments to ease the transition for these communities and producers as river restoration moves forward. Abundant salmon runs and prosperous communities can and should go hand in hand. As the region stakeholders come to the table together and think boldly, we can create a more prosperous future for everyone in this watershed. So many of my neighbors in Northeast Oregon, including the other two speakers on this panel, are already collaborating and innovating at the nexus of salmon and energy and ag and ecosystems. Our leaders should be rewarding them, listening to them, learning from them, and joining them as we reimagine together what the Snake River Basin can look like in the 21st century and beyond. To me, the effort to free the lower Snake and more holistically to problem solve at the confluence of all these crises and opportunities is an important test run for other related huge social ecological problems we must work together to solve, like climate change. Our problems are interconnected and our solutions need to be interconnected too. We can and must solve problems with and for each other. Experts estimate that breaching the 4 lower Snake River dams would almost immediately quadruple fish runs in Northeast Oregon streams. Breaching these dams will be the centerpiece of the greatest salmon restoration effort in history, restoring access to thousands of miles of high quality habitat in Northeast Oregon and Idaho, streams we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars fixing up for these fish. Greater Hells Canyon Council, my organization, got its start bringing together a lot of passionate people to prevent a dam. That's why this landscape in Hells Canyon isn't underwater. Dams aren't the only challenge facing salmon, God knows. And the salmon crisis isn't the only challenge facing the Pacific Northwest. We've got some gnarly ones. But I know that inclusive, bold, holistic problem solving is not only possible, it's already happening. Northeast Oregonians and communities around the region are already collaborating to claim a better future for our ecologies and communities. I hope you will join and support us. And that's it for me, although I do want to add that if audience members have Northeast Oregon connections and want to share your stories or your needs, or get more involved on the ground here to move this effort forward, I encourage you to reach out to me, Christina at hellscanyon.org. I'll pop that in the chat. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Andrea and Adam, and thanks again so much to Joseph and Save Our Wild Salmon for hosting this conversation. Big thanks to all of you for tuning in. I know you're salmon and river advocates too, so really appreciate your time. Okay.
Thanks, Christina. That was great. Next up, we're going to hear from Adam Capetillo, Nez Perce tribal member. And I think, Adam, you're calling in from central Idaho where you're working today, but of course you live in Northeast Oregon. Welcome.
Thanks, Joseph. Yeah, that's correct. I am actually in central Idaho where I'm working right now. I'll dive into a little bit more of that later. And I do live in Wallowa County currently. Like Joseph said, my name is Adam Capetillo. I am a Nez Perce tribal member and an avid fisherman. I've raised my whole family based off of an indigenous diet, and part of that, most of that, is salmon, elk, and deer, buffalo. So the salmon are very important to me, and I did spend a lot of years growing up fishing on the Clearwater River and Snake, and even in the Columbia. And when I got older, I got a job that taught me more about rivers in Northeast Oregon. So I started fishing places, the Imnaha River, Lostine River, Looking Glass Creek, and all these places where my ancestors used to fish, and it brings up stories that I heard. And I heard news stories along the riverbanks sitting with elders. And um, one of the common themes sitting there was always that, you know, in years past, there was plenty of fish in the system. Um, Chief Joseph Band lived in Wallowa County and or Wallowa Valley, and ate they ate salmon and steelhead and sockeye for the latter part of the year. It was one of our main staples of how we survived. So it's not just a food source. It's not a fun event for me. It's actually a way of life, something I'd like to preserve for myself and my children. And that's when I got into work in fisheries. I figured I take fish, I better give back. And I worked with the Nez Perce Tribe in our fisheries resource department for nearly 10 years. Started out that in juvenile fish. Got to work a lot, mostly with salmon, but we did steelhead and coho as well, pit tagging them, tracking them all the way to the ocean, and monitoring the run sizes within our local streams. Mostly on the reservation early in my career, but as I got on, I started monitoring outside the reservation in our ceded territories. And working fisheries was great. You know, you get to see hands-on the numbers coming back, what gets put in the gravel, what hatches. You get to see the out migrating and watch them grow for the first year of their life, basically. And it was really great seeing those numbers go out just for them to reach the hydro system, where we would lose an average of 10 to 20% of our run at each dam. And by the time they reached the ocean, we could have been looking at an 80% mortality rate before these fish ever got to actually go live their life. So that was really, that kind of hurt my heart to see, you know, and I almost got out of the business, but I was fortunate enough to stick into it. And I'm glad I made that decision because I got to do the adult stuff. And then that was mostly in the Northeast Oregon region. You know, I was working out of the Joseph Field office, again, for the Nez Perce Tribe. And that's when I got to see in-stream. You know, they, in Northeast Oregon, they make a 900-mile journey up the river from the ocean to Wallowa Valley. And all the obstacles they go through, you know, not only their natural predators, the man-made predators, the obstacles we put in their way, and when they do finally make it, waters are too hot. You know, we have other issues we're battling at home, where we've definitely made efforts. There's collaborative efforts going on within the community, but it never gets to seem to be enough. You know, it's everything I was doing, working fisheries, sitting behind a cubicle, you just feel helpless. And it got to be strenuous, and it was hard to continue doing the job, but you want to see this return. So you keep doing this job and you keep trying to make a difference, and it's all you can do. And then with the adult stuff, I'd see a lot of struggles. You know, it's hot water, so we see pre-spawn mortalities. Fish are dying before they ever got to spawn, and it's all things that we can prevent, you know, and we're trying, but we got to do a little more. We got to be more conscious, and it hurts, or it's hard to do when, say, for example, irrigators, they need water to irrigate their fields and everything. Well, at the same time, they desperately need that water. The fish desperately need that in the stream so that they can do their business. So after nearly 10 years of doing that, I decided I needed to do more. It wasn't enough. I couldn't stand sitting behind a desk and watching these numbers, watching the same story for 20 years almost. Just the data keeps repeating itself and it's not going anywhere fast. So then I started another business with some friends. I own two businesses, actually. One is kind of older. It's Geologics Llc. We do a lot of restoration work, mostly riparian so far. We've done some upland stuff, but our main focus is trying to improve stream health for when fish finally make it this long distance. Like, I'm in central Idaho now. I'm working on the White Cloud Preserve. It's a wildlife preserve that is on the East Fork of the Salmon River. lot of the area here has been degraded. You know, there's irrigation, there's grazing, but there's also wild horses, lots of elk and pronghorns out here. So the wildlife is here, but we want to support a healthier system for the salmon and steelhead that try to come back to this area. The Shoban tribe, they have a screw trap on the property, so they do monitor juvenile fish coming up and through this system. Currently, we have our plan of action. We are trying to plant more canopy cover to put shade on the river, so that way when they make this 900-mile journey to central Idaho, they have a refuge. They have someplace they can relax and wait until their body's ready to finally start spawning, because just because they get here doesn't mean they're ready. And sometimes that's when I see them dying before they actually get to spawn. So that's why I started this new business with some buddies of mine, and we do the best we can there. We are based out of Idaho. It's a Chalice-based business. So I started up Black Eagle Environmental Solutions. That is an Indian-owned business. We're going to do a lot of the same stuff, plus more. We wanted to get into more responsible forms of management, right? So goat grazing and pastures for noxious weed type of stuff, you know, and in-stream work, beaver dam analogs, all this stuff. We want to benefit the fish as much as humanly possible, since it's humans that are hurting their fish and their progress. So I'm taking great steps to do everything I can for the cause, and that's when I started my short-lived so far advocacy career for the salmon. I did a video called Lostine River, which you guys will get to see later. A lot of fun stuff working with those people. And we just hope to bring awareness to the struggle we have in Northeast Oregon, as well as elsewhere, Clearwater, the entire Snake River Basin and Columbia Basin. It all needs help. And biggest thing we can do is remove dams. There's going to be, there could be some losses in that, you know, livelihoods could be threatened, but at the same time, there are already livelihoods being threatened. Indigenous people's livelihoods are being threatened. That salmon's livelihood is being threatened. And that salmon, honestly, feeds more people, potentially feeds more people than any other livelihood at risk here. So I think we should do the one that helps more people. So that's my stance.
Adam, thank you for those words, and thanks for being here tonight. Look forward to continued conversation during the Q&A. Next, we have Andrea Malmberg, who is going to beaming in, I think, from Union, Oregon, and I'll just welcome you, Andrea, and hand it over.
All right, thank you so much. I'm just really happy to get to be with these great folks. I work quite a bit with Christina, and just have, like so many people, just virtually met Adam and Joseph. So I want to talk about all of this from a cattle ranching perspective in this.
Andrea? I just want to interrupt quickly. There might, if you could adjust, I'm not sure how to describe what to do, but your PowerPoint is visible, but it's not full screen, if you will.
It's in presenter mode. So we're seeing all the slides and the notes. There we go.
That looks much better. Thank you.
All right, you'd think I would know how to do all of this by now. I kind of think that there's a little bit of ghost action going on in Zoom. Like, it's not really, it's seamless as you think it should be. Anyway, so I live outside of Union, Oregon. And so this on the screen is This is Catherine Creek. If you've ever gone up to Catherine Creek State Park, it's up here. There's a highway that goes right here. This here is Little Creek. And this is a ranch that we started to care for, steward in 2019. I'm going to share a little background of why I find inspiration to actually create an upstream economy and how I think it really gives us potential for a lot of hope for the work that we're doing. So this is where I came from. Tony and I, my husband, came from in Wyoming. And so this is Twin Creek. You can see the meandering floodplain connectivity. It was about 6,000 feet, I suppose, about where Twin Creek is. And so we're cattle ranchers. And so this picture up on the left-hand side is Twin Creek upstream from our ranch. It was taken out of grazing, removing all livestock. So that's what it looked like. On our property just below this, so it's the same creek, is holistically planned grazed on the riparian areas for 15 years. So there was no livestock exclusion. So we included management, not excluding livestock. And what's really phenomenal about this and how I'm bringing Wyoming back to here, so for one thing, it's on the Oregon Trail. We actually, when we moved to Oregon, took the Oregon Trail here. So when we moved, or soon after when we moved, or soon before when we moved, I'm sorry, we had the worst recorded drought in history, 7 years of drought, 1 year, 3 inches of precipitation. But this connected riparian area, floodplain, never felt the drought. No production was lost. There was fish, there were beaver, there was water, there were neotropical songbirds, all of that. This is at the other end of the ranch of Twin Creek. So this is standing on a bridge, taking a picture one moment to one moment. So on the left is where we manage livestock. Again, livestock was included in the riparian management. And there was, and on the other side, there was also livestock, but probably about half the amount of stocking rate. So we were able to stock twice as many animals, twice as much of profitability, because there's not as much labor, vibrant fish populations, not salmon, but rainbow trout primarily. And I think what's really interesting in the pictures too is that you see this uplift of greenness that goes beyond the riparian area. So you see the greenness going up even on the uplands. And so, like, where would you want to be a trout? Like on that side of the bridge, or the other side where it's cooler? You know, there's still a lot of work to be done. There'd be nice to have more willows and all of that, but you don't, it's narrower. It's you don't have that down cut. You have some coolness in that vegetation. So Tony and I just kind of like challenges. So we do love working with livestock and seeing what they can do and manage properly. So this picture with Tony, I'm going to show another picture of this horse who's getting pretty darn old now, Paisley. So that's the sagebrush steppe of Wyoming. We were able to show that in that environment, we could actually have twice as many cattle than our neighbors, and even on BLM land, with data that actually created this vibrant sage grouse habitat. And we're like, what other species that is threatened can we see if we can influence and create this idea of this upstream economy where the wealth stays where it needs to stay, and people want to come and have this nice environment. So we did go down the Oregon Trail, and we are looking at and are influencing salmon habitat. So the context is very different. So now Tony can go to Buffalo Peak Golf Course and do a round of golf instead of doing some team roping, and he can be in his shorts and he can move the cattle pretty quick. So just to give you context of where we are, our place is between the Blue Mountains and the Wallowa Mountains. We're all in the, all of us are in the greater Grand Ronde Grand Ronde watershed. And so this is the upper Grand Ronde subbasin, the Wallowa subbasin, and then the lower subbasin. And what we're really looking at in terms of management for our influence is that we really are looking at the spawning and the rearing habitat. And so so I think that Christina is kind of more up in here. We're down over here. All right. And this is zooming in a little bit more of where we are. And so this is La Grande Island City. This is the town of Union. And so this is Catherine Creek going along here. So to just give a little perspective of what we're trying to do initially. So our first place that we bought has old water rights, irrigation water rights, and what we call them senior, and so they get priority. And those senior water rights are really important for making sure that we have plenty of water, enough CFS in the rivers, as well as cool water. And so we bought a ranch outside of Union, and actually some of it's in Union, and it was incredibly degraded land. And so we started, you can see there's quite a lot of weeds here. And our idea was like, there's a lot of hydrophytic plants, there's Baltic rush, there's not a lot of desirable plants, and there's a lot of work doing all this irrigation. Let's see what we can do if we improve really mimicking what bison and elk and like having bunched and moving animals can have. We're trying to mimic that with our domesticated livestock. So I see in the chat, bring back the bison. Yep, that could be, but we are trying to mimic what the bison did with cattle right now, and some sheep. So that's what it is. For good or bad, irrigation is a property right. And so how do you want to best express that in creating long-lasting wealth? And so what we see here is that we want to look at risk. So we know the salmon and steelhead numbers. I mean, it's amazing that there is not a take for irrigation rights. And it's happened other places, and why that we can have 77 steelhead come back up into Catherine Creek last year, and there's still not a take on irrigation is really extreme. So as a rancher, I want to say, like, how can I minimize my risk? And so just looking at pure numbers, this is just looking at like the irrigation required for alfalfa. So that first cutting is pretty darn good. That's you've got, 5.5 pounds of alfalfa to the inches of irrigation. But then if you have this shutoff date, like when the salmon and the steelhead really need it, you just see like, it's just not a good marginal reaction. It doesn't make any sense to do that kind of, to expend those resources. So what we ended up doing is stopping all of our irrigation in some of our pastures, not all of them, where it made sense that we could do it, and put all of that water where it makes sense back in stream for salmon and steelhead. And our production has increased from 4,470 to 7,800 pounds per acre without irrigation. So nobody's moving water around. We're just moving a little electric fence, keeping our cattle bunched. And it's all about really doing a grazing plan so that we can make sure that we're improving the water cycle. And so this is what it really means. If you have an increase of soil organic matter by 1%, the potential of water storing capacity, this is very conservative at 16,500 gallons per acre. I think it's, and it goes up to 28,000 gallons per acre. So the CFS that you can get by just improving your soil is tremendous. So there's not even it's not a win, like it's just not a zero-sum game. Like everybody kind of looks at this stuff often as a zero-sum game, and it doesn't have to be. And this is what soil looks like after 2 years. So this is Tony. So on the right side, that's all compacted. That is over irrigated, unexpressed roots, lazy plants, not very little microbial activity. 2 years of managing livestock, moving them around, making sure that the plants are able to recover and that mycorrhizae fungi can have some action, and there's allowing insects and all of the life to express itself. You start getting this loose kind of chocolate cake root structure and water holding capacity. It's just so darn quick. So in 2018, we were privileged to be able to steward another place from our home place. And so this is where we're really trying to look at where we have actually, so not only just managing water, which is super important, which we do here too, but actually trying to change and connect the rivers to the floodplain. So this is Little Creek, and you can see how channelized it is. And then this is poor Catherine Creek in jail. It is in prison. It is a mile-long riffle. So where this is that picture that I showed in Wyoming, where this place did not feel a drought, where it was probably a refuge for fish and like just coming around and trying to like, let's hunker down. We only got 3 inches, but this of precip that year, but there's insects and there's cool water. That's fantastic. There's not even that choice to have it here in this this Catherine Creek that's just like in prison. So even if we were to restore that, which I'm going to show you some pictures of what the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation have done, we're still desperate because we have those darn Snake River dams So trying to create all of this habitat up here, if they can't get there, that's pretty tough. So that's that same horse, Paisley, and that is the mile-long riffle on Catherine Creek. Some people look at it from the road and say, oh, there's trees around there, everything's fine. But those are trees for eagles to sit in and just like nab anything that possibly is able to hang out in a pool somewhere. There's not a lot of pools. So this is the ranch that we are stewarding, that we're looking to change. And this is the Southern Cross property that the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation own and have restored. So this is that pre-project condition, looks very similar to that picture of Tony and Paisley. You know, single channel, fast water. There's not a lot of wood in there. There's stream bank erosion. That upper picture is how it used to look. And so those meanders, look at all that different vegetation. And this down here is the channelized version. So that was like 2016, I think. 2014, maybe. So here is that 2014 really channelized. So this is Catherine Creek there, and that is the seasonal high flow after construction, and that's kind of moderate there. And that's the meander that is there now with a whole bunch of, there's lots of great vegetation. So that's happening. And so you have side channels, alcoves, floodplains, sediment, a lot more aquatic life that's happening. So this is what it looked like. You know, so when I look at that from a rancher perspective, I think that looks terrible. Like, I don't see a lot of vegetation. Even if you look on the grass is in there, it's just not that great. It looks really not that good. And so this is after the plantings that they've done. However, what we're starting to see there is that there is not the herbivory that needs to happen. So it'd be one thing if we had wild herbivory and we had all this tolerance for to move that wild herbivory, but we really don't. But we do have the tool of livestock. So even if it was bison, it could be that. So what we're seeing is a whole bunch of oxidizing, dying grasses happening. And what we want to see is that. We want to see that. And what we know about is that we can have this really healthy livestock production and have sound fisheries. And I don't think we can do it without both, actually. So here's the, I mean, I don't need to make everybody too sad, but this is what we're at. You know, so in the 50s, this is what we should be able to have. But in the 50s is when all this channelization happened, when we started, and when the dams on the lower Snake happened. And so I think that you can look at the economies of these communities as well as also degrading through these years. And so when you had, like, I just think it's shocking that in '86, the last wild Snake River coho adult passed the lower Granite Dam, and it's extinct. And so what are we going to, is 77 steelhead coming up here enough? You know, I think that that it's not. And from my perspective as a rancher, is that we need to have diversity in complexity equals resiliency. That is everything that we need to have. An extinction of any species, of plants, of fish, and of people and cultures are not okay either. We need to have that diversity in order to have the resiliency. So we're trying to get this little stretch that we are stewarding to bring back that diversity and complexity and resiliency. So taking Catherine Creek out of prison and letting Little Creek have its full expression of itself. It'll mitigate flooding. It will mitigate fire. It's going to create wildlife habitat. And it's really going to, I think, create a place where people can come and fish again, because you can't fish there anymore. And not very long ago, people still came to fish. You can see from, this is a 1936, how it used to be. And all you can see the diverse vegetation there. And so this is the ending kind of picture of what I want to start thinking about. And I would love to engage everybody to think of, as you're going outside of Union, Oregon, can you imagine that you see people fishing traditionally, you see livestock being managed appropriately and actually increasing biodiversity, you see beaver, you see all of this stuff that that I think is what all our souls need. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. A couple things before we transition to the film. One is, Andrea, you should look in the chat, because there's someone who's interested in your presentation, so we can help make that connection if needed. It also strikes me as I'm listening to you, Adam, and you, Andrea, that I don't think you've worked together, but it seems like there's some interesting partnerships that would be possible given your work and interests and priorities.
Yes, please.
Yeah, we should talk more.
Let's see. We're gonna transition, as we transition from the presentations from Adam and Andrea and Christina to Q&A. We're gonna have a 6-minute film that expands on the kinds of projects that both Adam and Andrea in particular have been talking about. Is it called Lostine? It's a film by Shane Anderson and Greg Haller, and it's a great film. I'm looking forward to seeing it again here. And I just wanted to the audience encourage you all to be thinking about questions, because as we transition in. So once we watch this film, we'll then jump into Q&A. So you can start if you've got questions to put into the chat or the Q&A box. You should feel free to start thinking about that. So with that, it's an honor and it's great. I'm excited to be able to show Lostine River by Greg Haller and Shane Anderson, featuring Adam and others. Carrie, I'm not hearing any sound, or others?
No, I can't hear anything either.
Let me try this again.
This area.
Thank you.
So my connection to this area runs pretty deep. My name's Adam Capetillo, a Nez Perce tribal member, descendant of Chief Joseph. Salmon, he's like a brother to our people, so I'd like to see us do more to protect these fish. The seasons all around everywhere have been pretty sad. A bunch of tributaries got shut down before we ever really got to fish them. Those salmon give everything for me, and I would like to give more for them. That's why I spent so many years working fisheries with the Nez Perce Tribe, trying to restore those runs.
And missing there. This facility is called Lostine River Weir. The goal is to recover this population to the point that is available for all fisheries, tribal and non-tribal, and to have the population persist throughout the future. So the Lostine River drains 90 square miles of the Wallowa Mountains, goes into the Wallowa. The Wallowa then goes into the Grand Ronde. The Grand Ronde then goes into the Snake, and then the Snake goes into the Columbia and on out to the ocean. The Wallowa Mountains provide a unique situation with 17 peaks over 9,000 feet. So it is more pristine and untouched. And that does give these fish probably an advantage some other places don't have. It keeps the waters cooler up there, keeps our waters cooler here. We trap adults here for doing a project. We're rebuilding a run that's been decimated over the years. Back in mid-90s, there's only about 30 fish. So we keep natural fish in the river, and we also make a program out of them on the hatchery, but we try to keep them connected genetically.
And they're at a 50-50 balance right now. 50% wild, 50% hatchery. All we're doing is making sure that our treaty right and our culture is intact.
Currently here in 2020, we are about 1,000 fish in the trap so far. It's 600 miles from the ocean to this location, over 8 main stem dams. Every dam causes its own issue with fish passage, even juveniles going out and adults coming back. The Snake itself has been getting hotter every year. Our fish have to get past there somehow, so it does impact us. If you were to take the Snake River dams out with what we see in the data, we would say that the populations would rise dramatically.
Here in the Lostine, so all the wild natural conditions are still here yet. In spite of the irrigators pulling water out, now we've got them putting water back in. The landowner, Woody Wolf, he's allowed us early on to be here.
My name is Woody Wolf. I'm 6th generation here on the Wolf Ranch in Wallowa County, Oregon. My property starts just behind the cattle and runs down to the confluence of the Wallowa and Lostine, and in that it runs through the Nez Perce Tribal Acclimation Site, the Weir. According to the Land Trust, I did the first conservation easement on a working farm or ranch in the state. So there's been a real movement to pressurize and conserve water, and through that we're learning that we can actually grow more crops with less water in many instances. Let's analyze it and see if we can do it better for ourselves and for the fish.
And the fact that they've done things like adjust their water usage, how they use the land, how they use the water, makes a big difference on what the recovery potentials are.
All the way around, everyone's needs. That's what we put together. How we protect and perpetuate these runs.
It's a prime river. I think it could make a full recovery if we put in the extra time and effort.
I find that the dynamics of the partnership have a greater potential of success if you truly understand the other person's interests.
I just really like that film, and the kinds of partnerships that all of you have been talking about gives me a lot of hope. The collaboration moving forward from here has just got to be a central theme in how we interact and solve problems together. Maybe what I'll just ask Adam, Andrea, Christina, as we transition towards Q&A, is there anything in particular you want to sort of say or add right now, or should I just jump in with questions? Okay. Then I'll do it. Julia wrote, I think this is mostly a question for Andrea, but others, you should feel free to chime in. Julia says she's heard you present before in your story, and she finds it incredibly compelling. She's interested in how others in Catherine Creek or the drainage or area have taken notice, and to what extent are the types of techniques you're using sort of being spread or being adopted by others.
Yeah. So hello, Julie. I'm glad you're on. And yes, it's kind of amazing that that you don't know, that a whole bunch of people don't know that I'm not a unicorn. And so I think the reason that might kind of seem that way is that, so we have a monopoly on our newspapers in this area. Capital Press owns, the same company owns all of our newspapers. And so there'll be stories about environmentalists or tribal people saying that we should remove the Snake River dams, but there's very little that ever gets published, no matter how hard people in agriculture do it. Like try to have that voice heard. So I think that so Woody Wolf's a good friend of ours. So there's an example. Corey Carmen, Six Ranch, Liza Jane McAllister. And so, and there's others that are doing it even maybe more subtly, right? So they're not willing to be out there on the forefront and everything, but we are really moving forward, I think. And what I think another big impetus is that farmers and ranchers have been going broke for a long time, and pumping costs for water and all of the inputs that they have been talked into doing are not working anymore. And so there is this whole idea of regenerative agriculture is happening. And so buy locally, support your local farmers and ranchers, and if you need any idea of who to go to, just contact me and I'll hook you up to some good food.
Thanks, Andrea. Adam or Christina, do you want to respond to that sort of question just about the folks in Northeast Oregon that you're interacting with, and with regards to, sort of prioritizing restoration and in the health of habitats, maybe in different ways? Do you see a lot of that growing or changing?
Well, Adam certainly is on the front lines of doing a lot of that restoration work for folks who are interested in getting engaged. I think it's worthwhile to keep in mind that Wallowa County had one of the first salmon restoration plans at the local county level of anywhere in rural Oregon, decades ago. And as a result of that plan, which is a collaboration between the county and various different state and federal agencies and irrigation districts in the region, there's been a lot of restoration work over the years and a lot of collaboration. And I think folks actually at the local level get along fairly well and are problem solving pretty robustly on behalf of fish, and have been doing that for a long time. Not to say there aren't still challenges in a lot of our drainages, but there's been really good work that has happened. And like I said in my presentation, it's a really tragic thing that a lot of that just results in beautiful vacant housing if we don't see some action on the downstream side. So need to be thinking about the whole system.
Adam, anything to add? Not to put you on the spot.
That's all right. No, I agree. People are working together pretty well to get a handle on restoration, and there's been a big push for more restoration lately. I've got a couple of contracts with the tribe actually doing more restoration. There's a fish passage built. There's more in Washington, but the tribe did it for steelhead, and I will be going to work on that when I get back home. So there is a lot more restoration going on, and people are working together well. There are still some people that kind of hold out and don't really want to get involved, but the majority, I think, are very into it.
That's great.
And it's worth just noting that, you know, even if salmon aren't in people's top 2 or top 5 priorities, like people want their grandkids to be able to fish. And so the question is, how do you reorganize some of the incentive structures to make it more possible for salmon to be a valuable, you know, contributor to the bottom line for stewards if they manage their lands well?
Thanks, Christina. I have a question I want to ask you about. Well, there's a couple, but I'll start with the first one. Can you all talk about? We've talked about salmon and steelhead primarily, but those aren't the only anadromous fish in the Northeast Oregon system, the Grand Ronde and elsewhere. Can you just talk about some of the other species that that live in the system that also migrate through? I mean, the lamprey eel is one example. There may be others. I'm just sort of curious about how this conversation applies to a set of species beyond salmon and steelhead.
Definitely, there are other valuable species. You mentioned the lamprey. They do live in the system. There has been a reintroduction program by the Nez Perce Tribe. We have actually been driving to Bonneville and another dam, name escapes me right now, but they've been translocating from the Columbia River. They'll bring them to one of our hatcheries on the reservation, hold them until they're nearing ready to spawn, and then go out to different locations and they'll transplant them in. And they've actually seen great success with those species. And currently we're starting a sockeye reintroduction into the Wallowa Lake. That's very early stages, but if our coho program that the tribe had going on in the Clearwater is any indication of what we'll get to do, we should have great success with that as well.
Am I right that the lamprey eel are they sort of similarly harmed by the lower Snake, the reservoirs, the dams? I mean, their numbers are quite low compared to historical levels. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, they can't actually pass the dams. They don't use fish ladders like salmon and steelhead do. I was at a conference in Pendleton, and there was a lamprey weir constructed. They were testing it out, and it actually worked quite well. So it takes a whole different kind of passage system for lamprey than for other salmonids.
But in lamprey, it sounds like weren't part of the thinking or planning when major projects were put in.
No, they weren't at all.
Yeah.
But people are thinking about them now.
There's also the charismatic megafauna of the snake in Columbia to be considered, which is the sturgeon, which also don't use fish ladders, and they're not in the small tribs, but they're in the big rivers, and their life cycles are perplexed in ways that aren't super well understood by the dams as well. And they live a really long time. And so there are sturgeon living in the Snake River that lived there before the dams were put in, but now can't migrate up and down the river system. And how well they're recruiting is not very well understood or known. But what is known is that they're not growing much. So there's this is anecdotal, but there's a sturgeon in an eddy at Temperance Creek that's been caught regularly by the same person for 30 years and has been 9 feet long, which is a big fish, but has been 9 feet long for that whole time. It has not grown. And the reason it hasn't grown is that it doesn't have salmon on the bottom of the river to eat anymore, because that was their main source of calories. So lots of impacts from ripple effects from salmon crashes and from dams to all species in the system, riparian and aquatic and otherwise, I should say.
I'd like to add too about the sturgeon in the Columbia River. There actually have been hermaphroditic sturgeon found in the Columbia River. Not 100% sure what caused that, but I think their lack of migration is stunting their growth and of all different kinds.
Are sturgeon in Northeast Oregon, or are they sort of main stem Columbia Snake River fish?
Well, it depends on if you count Hell's Canyon as Northeast Oregon, I suppose. I do.
Okay. Yeah. Great. I also want to ask a question about Adam. You've mentioned it, and Wallowa Lake. Christina, you also mentioned it. When I was doing some research in anticipation of this talk, I mean, I saw that same figure, Christina, that you mentioned. Wallowa Lake, which is, I don't know, 800, 900 miles inland from the river, from the ocean, excuse me, had so many fish coming back that it supported a couple of canneries. That just is stunning to me. So part of my question is just sort of, there was obviously a lot of fish back there. Adam, you mentioned a restoration program. I know there's also that's in the works from by the Nez Perce Tribe for sockeye. That historically was a very significant sockeye population that's been long gone. I assume, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But there's also, I'm sort of interested about, I know there's been some conversation around the dam that maybe raised Wallowa Lake. It was there before, the lake was there before, but maybe the dam raised it, and there's passage issues there. Could you just sort of talk, because that seems like a pretty significant project and one with great potential, and obviously links to what happens on Lower Snake.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what they have planned to combat that dam. It did raise the levels of Wallowa Lake, and now sockeye cannot pass. That's why we have kokanee, and Wallowa Lake actually, what is it, 2 world record kokanee came out of Wallowa Lake. They would have to build some sort of passageway through that dam, and it would be the only way to reintroduce sockeye, in my opinion. I haven't been on that side of it for quite some time, so I don't know if they came up with another solution or not.
My hope is that one of the investments that can come down the pipeline through regional collaboration and legislation investing in Snake River Basin communities is full fish passage on the Wallowa Lake Dam. Because my understanding is that the conversation has kind of gone back and forth between whether it should be trap and haul or whether it should be a full fish ladder and volitional passage. And the funding's there to rebuild the dam with trap and haul, but not yet there to rebuild the dam with volitional fish passage, at least the last that I heard. And so if we're thinking about reinvesting, in headwaters communities in the Snake River Basin as these dams come out and replacing their services, but also making sure that benefits from regional infrastructure legislation are distributed throughout the basin, I'm hoping that Wallowa Lake Dam we don't lose sight of making sure that some of those smaller dams, including Wallowa Lake Dam, have good quality passage on them too.
I think I want to tee off of something you just said, Christina, which is the investments of Northeast Oregon. Earlier this year, Congressman Simpson, sort of offered up his proposal for a comprehensive solution that restores Lower Snake River, and is coupled with a bunch of significant investments in impacted communities, that rely on the dams or otherwise could be impacted. The idea is that we can make this big transition with a set of investments that moves everyone forward together. And I think I just want to ask you maybe first, Christina, but then Adam and Andrea too. What's, there's what are the kinds of things that would be necessary for Northeast Oregon? You mentioned one option, which was the passage at Wallowa Lake. There's probably also transportation, potential investments or other things that the ag community, members of the ag community might need. I'm just interested in sort of what your thoughts are about what the priorities might be in that regard, and then also to what extent some of those conversations have been occurring. Or yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I will say that the things that you just mentioned are really important. The transition for people in Northeast Oregon, and there aren't too many, but there are some in Northeast Oregon who barge product on the Snake, making sure that their needs are covered, their transition is eased if the dams were to come out, making sure that they don't get forgotten. There's a lot of asks at the end, and the Wallowa Lake Dam being another real strong need. There's a lot of asks at the confluence of salmon and energy. As we're thinking about energy, it would be a real shame to replace a bunch of hydro that's causing all kinds of problems in the rivers with like deserts full of solar panels, which just cause other problems terrestrially, when we could be distributing our power generation around the region. And I've had a lot of conversations with energy folks about what is already happening and what could happen in terms of how the power from the Snake River dams gets replaced. There's already a lot of projects in the works and projects whose permits are still moving through the process, and opportunities for investing in grid stability and grid resilience too, because right now, even if we produce power, it doesn't do us any good if a wildfire takes down a transmission line. And so reinvesting to make our grid smarter, so that if a disaster like that happens, you can microfy the grid and make it still useful for your essential services. That's something that we should be doing throughout the Columbia River Basin, and making sure that, rural communities can become electricity and energy generation hubs. The Nez Perce Tribe actually is doing a lot of work in energy generation. So that's something to be thinking about, being a leader. They're being a leader already on that, as well as being a leader on fisheries for decades. I feel like, Andrea might be able to speak to what the ag folks need besides besides continuing to get money for putting water back in stream for fish when they have the management savvy to do that.
Yeah, so Eleanor wrote in the chat and then the question about bringing more ranchers into regenerative practices and then conservation districts. So our work is really all led by the conservation district here. They are providing us so much technical information. Tony and I don't know anything about fish. We know that diversity and complexity equals resiliency. And so whether it be butterflies, insects, fish, that's the name of the game. And of course, we want to see a whole bunch of salmon. So I think that really some of our ag service agencies like conservation districts and extension and all of that actually have come a long way. They're looking at soil health and all of that. I think that who has not come a long way is often elected officials, county commissioners, who have, I think, typically kind of want to keep this industrial agriculture that built those that are being subsidized. They're totally being subsidized by those lower Snake River dams. So when I think about this idea of transitioning agriculture, I want people who are wheat farmers to be wheat farmers. But is it really the best place to do wheat farming in certain places? Maybe it should not be. And the thing is that banks, our whole financial system is also behind what kind of agriculture is happening where. So if you go to a bank and you say, I want to transition this wheat field to a grass-based beef operation, I just think it's going to make me more money, it's going to be more resilient, blah, blah, blah. They'll say, oh, maybe some of it, but not all of it, because we rely on the failure of that crop every 5 years to pay for the loan that you have. So there's very big systematic changes in terms of what we're talking about. It's not like, oh, I just want to be a wheat farmer or I want to be a rancher. There's a lot of asking of like, what do we really need to transform this economy? And then the biggest thing that we just really need to look at is how can we connect rivers back to the floodplain? So when you have, there's a study that the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla did about the heat that is caused by the rivers being right next to roads. So we need to change that. Like, it happened really quick. All of these things happened fast to make everything industrialized. So we need to make it fast to change it back to regenerative. And we need to start from our county commissioners, our city councils, and don't always just think about the Wyden and the Merkleys in this situation. It's the local, the politicians that need to realize that we need to have an upstream economy. And how are we going to do that? Diversity and complexity of whole economic, cultural, and ecological systems.
Thanks, Andrea. Adam, you look like you were going to say something. No.
No, I don't think so. I didn't have anything. I was just yawning.
Adam, I think that you answered a question around hatcheries and wild fish, the difference. I don't know if you want to say anything. I want to transition towards policy and politics, which a couple of people have asked about. But before doing that, just wanted to ask if you wanted to speak to that question at all.
Sure, I'll expand on that a little bit. So the question was, what's the difference between a hatchery and a wild fish? Well, a wild fish is a fish that he was born in the stream. He was laid by his parents in the stream naturally, and he was not assisted in his birth in any way by human hands. Therefore, you will see on this fish, you can tell he's a wild fish by the presence of an adipose fin. It'll be the little fin right before the tail fin on top of the fish. That's a wild fish. A hatchery fish, it is going to be a fish that was artificially inseminated by humans. They extract eggs and milk from males and females, combine them together, incubate those eggs, and raise them up for a year in their hatchery until they release them for their what should be naturally occurring migration time. And this fish, you will recognize it as a hatchery because that adipose fin I mentioned before will be cut off. There won't be a fin on top. It'll just be smooth. And that's a hatchery.
Thanks, Adam. Unless there's anything to add on that from Andrea and Christina, I want to shift to sort of policy and politics a little bit because there's been a couple of questions around that. You know, sort of recovering some ground. Simpson made a big play. Mr. Simpson out of Idaho made a big play earlier this year and really kicked off a transformative conversation in the region about how we're going to deal with, are we going to deal with Snake River, protecting Snake River salmon from extinction. Governor Brown in Oregon has been a vocal and public leader in ways that are consistent with the notion of a comprehensive solution. Earl Blumenauer, congressman from the Portland area, also weighed in, not in agreeing everything that Mr. Simpson served up, but in the overall goal, let's solve this problem. And then, of course, more recently, Senator Murray and Governor Inslee in Washington have stepped forward. I think I'd just like to ask you three, maybe with a focus on Oregon, first of all, sort of, you know, what's your impressions or your understanding about the involvement, engagement, awareness of other members of the political leaders in Oregon? And then, of course, the question is, you know, what can people who are listening in, whether they're from Oregon or elsewhere, do to help advance this conversation and help the region take advantage of this opportunity? So I'll just sort of open it up there and interested in whatever thoughts you guys have.
You want me to go, Christina? So I think one thing to, if you support regenerative agriculture, cultural diversity, salmon, whole ecosystems, and upstream economy, you need to contact your representatives at the local, state, federal level directly. You cannot rely on letters to the editor. You need to tell them. And so it is telling your county commissioner, no, this is destroying your attitude towards like having, or even like we have these planning commission, like what are they called? Local planning groups. You know, it's funded by the Oregon Water Enhancement Board. And it's a sham. It's led by entrenched stakeholders that want to keep things the same way. And they want to have off-stream storage and create this mythology that all is going to be okay if we continue down this road of industrialized agriculture. And what's really tough is that normal people that are just trying to make a living can't go to these planning groups. And so we need to be aware and maybe mobilize each other so that we know these small little local stuff is having probably more impact sometimes than the big stuff. Not that we can't still think about the big stuff. But if our representatives feel like Wyden office doesn't know that there are any ranchers that think like me, and it's not true because they rely so much on social media and newspapers, and you know, we're just trying to make a living and do stuff. So we need everybody just to be able to like give them a phone call, send a direct email, that kind of thing. And it goes from as local as possible, making sure our conservation district is awesome, but making sure that when you get that ballot in the mail, make sure you know who those conservation district members are. And maybe you run for the conservation district so that you can make sure that they're behind the restoration effort that we need to have now.
I think that Andrea's point about networking locally is something that we forget at our peril always. So thank you, Andrea, for just speaking in such strong terms to that, because yeah, all these systems affect each other in both directions, small to large and large to small. And there has been a lot of grassroots action and a lot of good conversations happening at the local level around the region for a long time about these dams and about what would be needed in communities if they were to come out. I think the really remarkable thing that Representative Simpson did, I think it's Churchill that he quoted when he said, you know, sometimes to solve a problem, you have to make it bigger. And I agree and disagree. I think the way he made it bigger that is useful is he made it bigger by understanding there are lots of different threads that are converging on Snake River salmon and these dams. And there's the thread of big infrastructure investments coming down from the federal government. There's the thread of salmon getting closer and closer to extinction. There's the thread of a lot of communities and a lot of farmers and ranchers going broke for various reasons, as you alluded to, Andrea. There's the thread of climate change, and the related thread of the fact that we have now the technology to totally reinvent our grid and don't need these obsolete technologies like dams. Most of these hydroelectric dams, so that's apples and oranges in some ways, in the sense that some are more useful than others for producing power, but We have the technology that we need to replace the power, certainly from the Snake River dams and from a lot of other obsolete infrastructure too. And that's the main thing that has changed over the 30 years that this debate has been happening, in my opinion, because salmon have been in rough shape for a long time. But this is the first time that we have really had a significant change in the energy landscape that made it possible for us to reimagine what this region could look like. And so Simpson understood that all of these things were at play. And he's like, let's try to problem solve in a way that thinks about all of these threads and that really looks at this as a Pacific Northwest problem, as a regional problem, not as a Washington problem because the dams are in Washington, not as an Idaho problem because the fish aren't making it back to Idaho. This is a Pacific Northwest problem, and we all need to get on board to solve it. We need to do that in a bipartisan way, and we need to do that in a big way, in a bold way, and this is the time window when we need to do it because of these convergences of factors. And that's an exciting thing that I think I am excited to see our Oregon leadership really step up to that challenge now that Washington is taking good steps in the right direction, and Oregon's state leadership as well. I think that we have a real opportunity here, and Andrea's right. If you think we need to seize it, you should be contacting, and especially if you're an Oregonian, you should be contacting your elected officials and telling them, pay attention to this, get involved, represent Northeast Oregon's interests. We have 20% of the habitat that's blocked by those dams. Just that should be enough for them to be involved, and this legacy of cooperation and good conversation happening here on behalf of fish for what return on investment.
Thanks, Christina. Anything to add to that from anyone? I'll just sort of chime in on the, you talk about our opportunity. I think also implicitly in what you all have been saying tonight is the sort of flip side or the additive consideration around urgency. Right now, I think we've got both great urgency, these fish are in deep trouble, and we've got unusual opportunity in terms of the political leadership in the region, the bipartisan engagement that's currently occurring, which I think is an opportunity and something to build on. And the fact is that there's some significant spending bills that haven't quite passed, but are anticipated too soon. And if assuming they do, will provide, I think, large buckets of money that can help support this kind of transition that Mr. Simpson's talking about, and now others in the region are too. Governor Brown, Governor Inslee, Senator Murray, and so forth. So, I think I'm just underscoring the urgency and opportunity, and then the thing that we can all do, which is heard from you, contact your legislators, engage your networks, and ask them to do the same. And I think there's just a lot of creative ways that we can be working from the ground up to seize this opportunity. Adam, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will just sort of raise for all of you a question from Eleanor. The question asks about how the politicians are reacting to the tribe's insistence on removing the 4 lower Snake River dams as part of honoring our nation's treaties with the tribes. And just a little bit of background, I view the Nez Perce Tribe has just been a consistent and out ahead leader on this conversation around the future of the lower Snake River. That conversation's broadened with the, as evidenced by the affiliated tribes Northwest Indians resolution earlier this year, calling for endorsing, I think, a Simpson approach, endorsing lower Snake River dam removal, endorsing a comprehensive package. And then that was in many ways sort of reinforced or occurred again at the national level with the National Congress of American Indians. So the tribes, I think there's always been tribal support for restoring the lower Snake River. But it really seems like there's momentum in Indian country around that. And maybe with that, Adam, feel free to correct me or if I've mischaracterized things or anyone else, but I'm just sort of interested in responding to that question and the dynamics.
Yeah, no, I think that was a good question, and it definitely deserves to be acknowledged. So honoring treaty rights has always been a sticky subject. You know, it's people have different interpretations of what that looks like. Now, as far as what are politicians doing, or how, you know, wait, let me read that one more bit. So to answer the question in full, I can't really tell you what the politicians think and how they're reacting, because I haven't really been paying enough attention to that. I admit I need to do a better job with that. But I think as far as, you know, acknowledging the fact that those dams do affect our treaty right, and as far as removing them being a part of them honoring that treaty, I don't quite feel that that's correct, but removing them to allow us to manage and maintain the species is more honoring that treaty right. And I think that aspect or that thought process is really starting to come around now, which it hasn't been in the past. So I think we're making some leeway on the honoring of treaty rights.
I'll just add, from my impression, based on conversations with various people in the space and the topic of lower snake and salmon recovery, I feel the impression I have is that there's a much greater and growing appreciation in the region and maybe beyond to recognizing, as it always has been, but not been properly recognized, that salmon recovery is an issue around justice. And meeting, I mean, if fish go extinct, we're violating, I think our nation is arguably violating its treaty obligations and responsibilities made many years ago to the Northwest tribes. But I think that frame of people appreciating, embracing, acknowledging the justice dimensions of salmon recovery is a significant factor that's helped move the politics in recent years. That's my impression.
I think that's really right, given what, for a lot of different reasons, given the way that conversations are happening at the local and at the federal levels these days. I also just think, you know, one piece of this is that tribal people, I think, really understand, the ones that you know I work with on first foods, not so much on salmon, more on plants, but is that, like, you all get what's necessary to survive in a place. Like, there's a natural capital piece here too. 300 pounds of salmon per person per year, and that's the low end of the estimate. That's survive. That's what it takes to survive here. Like, that's how people survived here for 16,000 years or more, is because those fish were available, as well as the other first foods that are also protected under those treaties. And so I think it's worthwhile every now and again just zooming out to the very basic fundamentals of, like, what has made it possible for people to live in the Pacific Northwest for as many thousands of years as they have. A salmon is a pillar of that. Like, don't knock out your pillars when you're already in a situation where you're, like, facing ecological collapse, like, and crisis and great change. Like, keep your pillars intact. Do not let those pillars get knocked out from under you if you want to survive, much less thrive in a place. That's what I've learned from working with tribal people on food.
Thanks, Christina. So we might be heading towards wrapping up. And I just want to give each of you, first I want to thank you so much for spending the evening with us and sharing with us. But I also just want to give each of you the chance to, you know, make some concluding remarks, or, you know, if you're inclined to do so.
Well, I guess I'm still unmuted, so I'll just say a big thank you again to you, Joseph, for stewarding and lassoing us for this conversation, and to SOS for hosting, and for all the good work you've been doing on this issue for so many years. Again, if folks are interested in getting involved in this campaign and have Northeast Oregon connections, especially, I hope you'll reach out to me, Christina at hellscanyon.org. And let's talk and strategize about how your story and your needs can be put to work in the campaign. And I'll just reiterate that we're in a tight time frame of great opportunity and great urgency right now, and let's not let it pass us by. So thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, Christina. Thanks you for the work you do. Andrea?
Yeah, thank you very much. I just really appreciate being able to have the diversity and complexity of just the group of us together, as well as the 45 other participants as well. I think they probably come from all walks of life. And I think at this time, we just really need to know that we are stronger together. And how can we learn from each other, and come at all of this with a sense of curiosity and empathy for those that do feel like they're losing something, but also a sense of compassion for those who have already lost a lot. And so how can we restore what we can and do? We've got some major healing to do, as well as some building to do.
Thanks, Andrea. Adam, you get the final word.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning in this evening. Thank you, Joseph, for putting us on, giving us all a platform to tell our sides. I'd like to just remind everybody that with unity, we can do great things. So let's get on the same page. Let's try to make something happen for the better. Appreciate everybody listening and all the comments that came in. Everybody have a good evening.
There you have it. Adam, Andrea, Christina, thank you so much. To the folks tuning in, the audience, I just want to thank you also very much for spending the evening with us, and the great questions, and have a great evening, and we'll go onward forward together. Take good care. Bye-bye.